Hello everyone and welcome to the first episode of the Beef Noodle Report. If you look on my Instagram, you might have noticed that I've eaten a lot of beef noodle soup. Why is that? It's because I wanted to find the best beef noodle soup in Taiwan. Now if you do a Google search for best beef noodle soup in Taipei, you get a lot of results, but most of the results are similar. They list the same restaurants over and over again in all these lists. Statistically, you can't really say something is the best when you've only tried like a few, maybe 10 at most, beef noodle soup shops. So I'm really skeptical about all these lists. And most of these lists, these shops are full of tourists or people that want just a pretty Instagram picture. And I find some of these articles, they have bias towards shops that are popular with tourists. Now that doesn't necessarily mean the best. So for example, this CNN travel article is pretty hilarious. It has most of the shops are in hotels and it's not a place that typical Taiwanese people will go eat at. I mean, this is a pretty poorly done article and clearly the writer has not really done much research. I rarely hear anyone say they recommend the W Hotel's beef noodle soup. So for my report, I'm going to try to be as objective as possible by rating things in 5 categories. One is spiciness level, oiliness, saltiness, sweetness, and herbal flavor. The first restaurant that I'm going to review is called Shelton the Little Men. It used to be in a shack with 2 round tables and people sitting really close to each other. But it looks like they moved into a newer shop, maybe because of COVID and they wanted to practice social distancing. But as you see here, I ordered some side dishes with some tofu skin, some eggs, and pork head. Now I do recommend their side dishes. It's quite delicious, really nicely braised. The pork head was pretty tender, and the tofu skin and eggs were pretty flavorful. Now that huge plate that you see there was only 90 NT, around $3 US. I have to say, after eating a whole plate of that, you're pretty full before having the beef noodle soup. I've come here a few times before and they're pretty consistent with the soup base. It's not too salty, maybe just a bit average same as other beef noodle soup shops. But the spiciness level is actually pretty high. It kind of overpowers the soup and the other flavors. Now, they also give 4 or 5 big slices of beef. It's enough for a whole steak, I have to say. And the noodles were just pretty normal. They're like the normal flat noodles you see in most shops. Now, I wish the soup was slightly less spicier and maybe a bit less oily, but that's my personal preference. Now, if you want to try this shop out, I would recommend going earlier than noon, because once you get to noon, you get a lot of workers lining up for takeout and also for seating inside. So it might be a while until you can actually get a bowl of noodles. Also, traditionally, people would also put the pickled mustard in their beef noodle soup. The shop has a pretty mild pickled mustard and it really cuts through the oiliness and balances out the soup a little bit. But I would still prefer it to be less spicy so that I could taste out more flavors. But if you like a spicy soup, I would recommend this shop. They also have a non-spicy variety called Qing Dun, but I haven't tried that yet, as I like eating Hong Sao the Little Men, which is red braised beef noodle, which is the traditional one. Overall, I would come back to this place if I was in the area, but I wouldn't make a trip out just to eat at this one location. So here's the flavor profiles for this one shop. If you like spicy and oily beef noodle soup, I would recommend this shop. So this shop is called Sixiangbing, and it's in the new mall that opened up recently called A13at Xinyiqu. It's a chain restaurant, maybe a chain of 2 or 3 shops, but it has a pretty busy lunch crowd, and usually there's a line. They also sell braised pork over rice, which I highly recommend. It's also pretty good, but that'll be a review for another time. So I got the regular beef noodle soup, and that's a large bowl I'm eating right there. It is enough for 2 people. It's a ginormous bowl, and for an extra, I think 30 NT, I would highly recommend it to split among 2 people, and then also split braised pork over rice. So the soup is pretty clean, not that oily. It tastes like a beef consomme with a bit of soy sauce in it, but it was quite salty, though it's not always salty. So the consistency of the shop, I think they're still trying to figure it out, but I would recommend this if you like a clean tasting beef noodle soup without too much flavor except for beef flavor. The noodles are pretty, what I would say, QQ, which is a bit springy factor, chew factor that Taiwanese use to describe anything springy like boba. The beef was also pretty tender, and they have a pretty good hot sauce that you could add in the soup, but that's for everyone's personal preference. I think they have 2 different spicy oils. One is like sata, which is a satay, and another is a regular mala spicy, which is like a numbing chili pepper. So overall, it's decent beef noodle soup, but it was a bit salty and left me drinking a lot of cups of water afterwards. Now, I would only recommend this restaurant if you're shopping in the mall and nothing else seems interesting. Now, this mall has a lot of interesting things in the basement and in the top floor, but if you're craving beef noodle soup while shopping at the Lego store, then I would recommend this restaurant. But there are, I think, a couple better beef noodle soup shops in other malls surrounding the area. Overall, I would call this a good value bowl because of the sheer size, and bring a mate if you want to share this big bowl of beef noodle soup with someone. And I would have to say their braised pork rice is one of the better ones I've eaten. So overall, you see here, it still had a bit of a spiciness to it, but it was very barely noticeable. And the herbal flavor was quite average. Pretty much find that same flavor in other shops around in Taipei. The sweetness, couldn't really taste that much sweetness, but the saltiness was pretty above average, and it was a clean soup with not that much oil in it. So the last shop of this report is called Duan Cunzhen, and the one I went to is inside the movie theater Weisho Cinema in Xinyi district. This shop actually started popping up a lot in Taipei. I think there's around 4 to 5 locations, and it also popped up a lot in my Instagram feed, so I had to try it out. Now, my first initial impressions of the soup is that it's hearty. It has a big, bold flavor and very heavy star anise flavor, and it is packed full of flavor. And I would recommend this if you like very strong, flavorful things like Indian food. They definitely stewed a lot of Chinese herbal medicine in there, that the soup was somehow a bit bitter at the beginning, but you could slowly gain appreciation for that flavor because it's pretty unique. Now the meat on the other hand was kind of odd. It was pretty soft and tender, but it tasted like biting into a steak, like maybe a medium rare steak. And I think they give two big slices of meat, so it's pretty worth it. Even though the meat was plentiful, it had a sour aftertaste, which I found kind of odd, which makes me wonder how they prepared this meat or if the meat was slightly off. As for the noodles, they used the hand-pulled noodles, so if you like those type of noodles, it's the one that is quite chewy and I guess QQ. I would recommend that. They also offer thin noodles, which are almost like ramen noodles, so that's also pretty good. They also have pretty good pickled mustard that has a slight spice to it, and a lot of my friends say they come here for adding the pickled mustard to the soup because that's a winning combination, they say. So I would recommend this to anyone who likes strong flavors with strong spices, like foods that you find in Middle Eastern cuisine or Indian cuisine, because this bowl of soup really packs a lot of flavor. And they also have really good noodles, if you like the chewy type. The ramen noodles I heard was also pretty decent. Even though the soup was quite oily, I didn't feel like it was too overwhelming, and the mustard greens really cut through that fat really nicely and balanced the bowl of soup. And even though it looked quite dark, the soup itself wasn't that salty. So the times I've been here, it's usually pretty full, so I would either go early or late during the day so that there are seats. So overall, there's a average spiciness to this, but the herbal flavor is really strong. And the saltiness level, I guess, was pretty average. And as you can see from the video, that soup was pretty oily, but it wasn't too oily to the point that it was too rich. Please subscribe to get notified of the weekly beef noodle soup report, and remember to smash the like button. Thanks for watching. Until next time.